Servlets and Java server pages make the foundation of the way applications work. We need them. That's what translates the HTTP protocol into Java for us. And they're great. They make HTTP easy, but they only cover the most basic of features. It's kind of like building a house with logs and, I guess, some raw pieces of metal. We want better components from that. We need to build things that are better framed for us. Literally, if we're talking about a house, we're not going to do it from logs. We want nicely clean-cut lumber. Even sized, consistent in size, maybe even pre-made framing and, pre-cut stringers and all that sort of stuff. And so web apps, like a house, is more than just, a run of some wood nailed together. A web app is much more than an individual request and an individual response that comes in. We want to be able to have wizards that go through multiple pages. We want to be able to have people log in and stay logged in for many pages. We want to have full solutions that gives us a lot of intertwined pages where data comes in and is safe and secure and showed to that user and not spread across all users. And I don't have to write ridiculous amounts of code to make that happen. So we do that by using Java Web Frameworks, and there's tons of them out there. This is just a few names of many, many that come and go that are out there. Tapestry, Spring MVC, Struts, several versions of that, Google Web Toolkit, and then most importantly, Faces, many versions of Faces. This is Apache MyFaces there, but we're not even looking at that one specifically, because we'll understand here in a second, Java Server Faces is the one we're looking at. We're not going to look at all these. We're going to look at Java Server Faces for two reasons. Number one, it's a standard. Java's standard web frameworks toolkit helps us define what Java Server Faces are. The idea behind this is to have a vast array of tools that can be plugged into a standard framework, just like we did with JDBC, just like we did with sockets. That's the intent. It allows many vendors to build shared components and you to build up sites from there. Also, it's built into NetBeans. It's going to give us some quick and easy way to build these applications because NetBeans has it built in. So there's some cool visual components we can use. There's some cool processing components that are available, but we're not going to get into super inside of that. Our biggest advantage is we get it from the tool. So since most of the tool is going to do the work, I want you to understand the structure of what the tool is constructing. Now, there's this way of building an application called the Model View Controller. The view inside of here is going to be defined by the Java server pages, the JSPs. That's going to be what gets shown as HTML back to the user. The model is the code we write and create that deals with the specifics. In our case, it's the product, it's the customer, it's the information we're getting from the database and managing that stuff. The controller is the logic that goes into what happens when a user presses a button. I press the add button, what happens? I press the delete button, what happens? I click on a link, what happens? The controller manipulates the model, pulls data from the model, and puts it back and sends it to the right page to be able to render that data. And the configuration ties all this stuff together. What we're going to find out is as we move into these super fancy frameworks, we're not going to be given linear code anymore. And I've hopefully been getting you ready for this notion as we've been building our applications. But this is where it really goes into action. We're not going to have a main method and we can follow lines of code. Stuff's going to be, if you will, hopping around all over the place. And I have to understand how it's configured. I have to understand how the conventions work in order to be able to find where the code is coming from and where code is going to and what happens next. You're not going to find everything in a linear format anymore. So the JSP elements are used basically to draw text. As much as we're going to see these fancy pretty screens, we don't build them. We don't build text boxes, we don't build radio buttons, we don't build drop-down boxes. We're building HTML text that renders these things. And we're going to use that using basic HTML, Java server page tags, and more likely custom Java server faces tags to do our work for us. There's an example of some of them, and they look a little bit different. This is an old screenshot of some code. They're actually changed quite a bit over time. And so most of the work is done within JSF and the custom tags that JSF provides. We're not going to have to do a ton of this stuff by hand. It's going to be generated for us, and it's going to do most of the rendering work for us inside of this. So that's good news inside of here. So understanding what these custom tags are is an important part of the coding. The custom tags are given to us as a library. The custom tags point is to represent something that looks like HTML, but behind the scenes does dynamic Java stuff. They're backed by Java code. So when I say go print out this table, it's actually going to print out all of the data on the whole table, even though I only see a couple lines of code. It's going to be looping over the data behind the scenes. When I say go put a text box out there, it's going to take that text box, it's going to tie it to the back end and the data that's being stored in the Java code in the back end. So a few useful tags that we can look at here include things that we're standardly commonly seeing, like HTML tags, head, body, form tags. All that is tied together. That allows us to do, you can see down here, a custom tag. What we just say, the form tag, the web UI JSF here, form tag, gets pointed out where it says, okay, well, this is the action inside of here, this is the coding type I want inside of here, this is the post or get method I want inside of here. It puts all the rest of those details, so you don't have to be aware of that as a coder. It's going to be generated based off what the server, how the server is expecting and wants to see that data. And then there's tags for printing out static text or printing out text fields or adding buttons to the screen, and all those again tie back to the application. We'll see that as we go, how those things tie back into the application, because most importantly we need to bind the tags to our Java code. So when we have a text field out there, text fields are there to do two things. They're there to receive data from the user and allow the user to see the data that the system has and perhaps alter that data. And so our text field needs to tie to some Java variable. It could be an attribute of an object, most likely. And that attribute of the object is going to be represented in that object and perhaps taken down to the database or loaded up from the database for you to be editing. And so I want to take a binding inside of here. You can see the word binding, where I go to some object and some field, and it's going to bind that to the object. And we'll see that in action as we generate this code and we go to this code in action. But page one is the name of a bean outside of there. And first name field is the name of a parameter that's outside of there that we're going to tie that into. And so behind the scenes then, we have this thing called a backing bean. And the backing bean has some Java class, and it has text fields or it has just straight strings, depending on what your implementation chooses to use. And it allows you to do getters and setters on those values, and you can manipulate those values. You can see those values. You can update those values, and it ties it straight into your Java code. So you don't have to go through and go to a servlet. You don't have to go into that servlet and say, get me this parameter. You don't even have to know the name of the parameter coming in. It just automatically does it for you. So the similar thing works within there for the page actions. The page actions go forward with you pressing a button and that button being reflected as a method behind the scenes. So when I press a button, I want something to happen. That something happen is defined as a method you write on some existing backing bean. So the page one bean, again, we're seeing that here. And then we have underneath page one bean the add button action. And this add button action lets me click on a button and then execute that code in response. So if we keep going here, we can see that backing bean has this add button underscore action method. And so when that button's pressed, this button gets called. So system.println, I was pressed. Okay, it's not actually printing back the screen, it's just printing on the server, but it would allow us to see that this was the button that was called where we're going to go off and run this code. Then we would have to do the debugger and stuff. But that's the idea behind it. So I can tie in my JSP this button that we're creating to this code behind the scenes. The way this all happens is there's two ways. One is through an explicit configuration file. This explicit configuration file is used to point from this page to this bean, which resides in this location. I can create a bean like this called page one, and I can tie it from some specific class that gets created, and I can put it in some sort of scope. So on each request that comes in, or for each user's session that comes in, or for all users in the application, I can use this bean. Now, this configuration has largely been replaced through what's called convention, and we'll see that in our application as well. What it's saying is, if this bean is in this location, name this thing, I'm going to use it by default. So you could always change it up if you want to, but that's what it is over the top of that. So you're allowed to actually go off and add more beans yourself if you so choose. It's something you can go off and do by managing that configuration. This shows an example of that happening. I could create a data access object, point to the class, and make that available for all users in the application to be able to go access data in the database. This is uncommon because I can do it easier through convention, through configuration, but it's possible. You can go create whatever beans you want to and make those things happen. And then in your code, you can access that bean, and it's kind of roundabout. I go to the configuration, and I say, go get the application, go get this resolver, then go get me the value of this bean, name this thing. But again, I can share this bean throughout my code and not have to pass it along. Not have to create new instance of it. Just have it be all out there. So I just wanted to point something out to you before you get too crazy in this. What we're going to work here is what the tool generates for us. It's highly functional. The demos we're looking at are not finished code. You will not be an expert in Java server pages when you walk away from this 1 week that we will look at them. But you will have a good literate understanding of what they do and how they work. If you want to understand them more, you're going to have to spend a bunch of time. We could spend 5 weeks alone on Java server faces, and depending on what you want to do with them, that might still not be enough. So there are some more resources to look at. We're going to see some demo in a little bit, but I have a few links here that I'll also share that you can go through and pull and download from these resources and be able to see these things in action. These are going to be text that will walk you through step by step the exact same things we'll do in demo through the videos here as well. So these are all resources for you to look at. Hopefully it gives you a good feel for what these are. Let's go take a look at how we go off and build this stuff.